My husband emailed me at 11:47 p.m. from Costa Rica. He said he had moved my inheritance into a joint fund for our future. His words were coated in that calm, meditative language he loved to use whenever he was doing something selfish and wanted to sound enlightened. He attached a photo. It was him standing barefoot on a sunlit deck, one arm around a woman in white linen, their glasses raised toward the ocean. Her face was turned slightly toward him, laughing. And that laugh, that profile, that glint in her eye, it was unmistakable Celeste. My best friend for over 2 decades. My emergency contact, the woman who held my hand when my mother died, the woman who knew every detail about the money my mother left me. Daniel did not know I had already removed myself from the trust 2 weeks earlier. He did not know that every login attempt was being recorded. He did not know that the woman he betrayed had already stopped being naive or silent. I did not respond to his email. I simply read it once, twice, and then closed my laptop. The trap was already set. They just did not know they had walked into it. I am Victoria Langston, and here is how it all went down. My name is Victoria Langston. I am 50 years old, a retired financial strategist living in Asheville, North Carolina. For most of my adult life, I carried the weight of numbers, clients, deadlines, and success. Then my mother got sick and everything stopped. I walked away from my career to care for her full time during the final 4 years of her life. Alzheimer's is slow and cruel. It strips away dignity one forgotten word at a time. But I stayed. Every bath, every panic attack, every long night when she thought I was her sister, I stayed. After she passed, I buried her with a handwritten note tucked in her sleeve. You were everything, and I will build something in your name. She had lived simply, never remarried after my father died, and saved every penny. When I opened the will, I learned she had left me $650,000 in a structured trust. It was everything she had, and more than I expected. My plan was clear. I wanted to build a foundation in her name, Margaret House, a small non-profit to support women over 40 navigating grief and financial independence. Not flashy, just solid, just real. Daniel knew all of this. He had listened to me cry about my mother, talk about our shared garden dreams, and the kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. I had met him at a mindfulness seminar 3 years ago, about a year after my mother's diagnosis. He was charming in that soft-spoken, yoga-in-the-park way. He ran small retreats focused on healing from loss and realignment. I was skeptical at first, but he was persistent and gentle. He asked questions, remembered details, never pushed. And after 2 years of cautious dating, I let myself believe I could start again. We married in a small ceremony beneath the dogwood tree in my backyard. No family, just a few close friends. And Celeste. Of course, Celeste. She had been my constant since we were 19. We had met in college, survived our first bad breakups together, co-signed our first apartment lease, held each other's hair after too much cheap wine. She knew me better than anyone. When my mother started declining, she was the first person I called. She brought over groceries, coordinated part-time caregivers when I burned out, and reminded me to sleep. I loved her like a sister, so when she and Daniel started working together on retreat planning, it felt natural. She'd always been interested in holistic wellness and had strong opinions on what women in midlife needed. She and Daniel seemed like a good team. I did not know then what kind of team they were becoming, but there were signs, soft ones, quiet things I didn't want to name, not yet, not when I was still putting myself back together, not when I still believed love and loyalty could live in the same room. The red flags didn't come waving, they came quietly, like a slow leak beneath the floorboards. It started with Daniel's travel. At first it was weekend retreats nearby, then longer trips out of state, then suddenly international research collaborations with Celeste. He said they were scouting retreat locations in Costa Rica, Belize, and Portugal. I believed him. I wanted to. He called when he could, sent photos of beachfront yoga decks and women journaling in linen. I told myself it was just work. Celeste stopped coming by as often. She used to drop in without notice, arms full of organic groceries or ideas for the non-profit I wanted to build. Now her texts were short, her visits rare. She always had a new client, or was helping Daniel prepare for something. I still didn't let the thoughts take shape. I had just lost my mother. I wasn't ready to question the two people who knew how hollow that loss had left me. But things shifted. Daniel became vague about finances. Before we had a clear understanding, the inheritance from my mother would stay untouched until I was ready to invest it into Margaret House. Suddenly he was making suggestions, small ones at first, that we consolidate our accounts, that it was silly to keep money sitting in a static trust, that a couple should think long-term. He said he had found an opportunity to invest in a retreat center in Costa Rica with low startup costs and high return potential. I said no, politely, firmly, but he brought it up again 2 weeks later, then again. Celeste echoed the sentiment in an offhand comment over tea one afternoon. "I think your mum would want you to live," she said, "to do something beautiful with what she left, not just sit in mourning." I didn't argue. I just smiled. But I didn't forget the way she said it, like she was rehearsing something. One afternoon, I walked past Daniel's office and noticed his laptop open. He was in the garden. The screen showed a spreadsheet with my name in one column and figures in another. The words projected reallocation and Phase 2 funding were bolded. I took a photo with my phone and left the room. That night, I checked our shared cloud storage. We had a folder for shared household documents, but within it I found a new folder called Wellness Expansion. It wasn't password protected. Inside were documents with titles like Asset Transfer Strategy and Retreat Revenue Forecast. Some of them were signed with my name, my signature, only I hadn't signed anything. That was when I knew. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind press against the windows, and I felt the last warmth of trust leave my body. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just ambition. It was betrayal, layered and deliberate. They thought I wouldn't look. They thought I was still grieving. They thought silence meant surrender. But I was already reaching for my phone. I didn't call either of them. I called Miriam, my mother's lawyer, the woman who had helped draft the trust, and I said 10 words that changed everything. "I think it's time we opened the backup file." Miriam did not ask many questions. She listened, took notes, and asked me to meet her at her office the next morning. When I arrived, she had already reviewed the trust structure. What I had forgotten was that my mother, ever cautious, had requested an additional safeguard, a clause allowing the trustee to restructure the trust immediately if any signs of coercion, fraud, or third-party manipulation were suspected. That meant Daniel could not touch a cent legally unless I allowed it in writing, which I had not. But he had tried. That alone was enough to trigger a legal response. Miriam asked if I had any documentation. I handed her my phone with the photo of Daniel's spreadsheet and copies of the fake signatures from the cloud folder. She scrolled through them in silence, then looked up and said, "This won't just hold up, this will hold them accountable." Her assistant began compiling a legal notice to freeze any activity related to the trust. Meanwhile, I started digging further into what Celeste and Daniel were planning. The more I searched, the more familiar it all felt. The proposal for the Costa Rica retreat, the layout of the rooms, the wellness philosophy, even the name they proposed to investors, Marga, a blend of Margaret and Ashram, my mother's name, my mother's memory, used as branding for a business they were building behind my back. I remembered something else. 3 years ago, Celeste had come to me in tears. She had taken a loan to launch a line of organic skincare, but it had failed. She needed someone to co-sign a restructuring loan or she would lose everything. I did not hesitate, I signed. The loan had a 5-year term. It was still active. I called the bank, confirmed it was still under my name as co-guarantor, and then I looked up the property listing for the Costa Rica retreat they had purchased. It was registered under Celeste's LLC. That meant if she defaulted, I could file a lien against the property. It was poetic. The house she had tried to steal from me with my own mother's money was one I now had a legal path to take from her. I contacted a forensic accountant and handed over every email, screenshot, and transaction log I had. He worked fast. Within 48 hours, he identified multiple transfer attempts from my accounts using remote login from a Costa Rican IP. Every attempt failed because of the trust's security measures, but the attempts were logged with timestamps and devices. He found notes in Daniel's cloud folder referring to timed access windows and reducing visibility by keeping transfers under regulatory thresholds. They weren't just careless, they were calculating. On the 5th day, I received another email from Daniel. This time he sounded enthusiastic. He told me how excited he was about what they were building and how he hoped I would come visit soon. He said it was ours and that my contribution had made it possible. He ended with a line that made my stomach turn. "You've always been the foundation, Vic. Now it's time you let us build the structure." I did not reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Miriam and the accountant. Then I called a second lawyer, a civil litigator who specialized in financial misconduct. I told her everything. She asked me one question. "Do you want this to be clean or do you want it to be over?" I said both. She smiled. "Then let's take it apart, piece by piece." That night, I sat alone in the living room, holding my mother's wedding ring in my hand. I remembered the way she used to say, "Trust is earned, not inherited." And I thought, "Mum, I'm sorry it took me this long, but I'm ready now." From that point forward, everything I did was deliberate. There were no confrontations, no screaming matches, no emotional outbursts. I moved like a chess player, several steps ahead, saying as little as possible and documenting everything. First, I worked with Miriam to formally restructure the trust into a protective foundation under my mother's name. This meant that even if Daniel somehow tried again, there was no path for him to access a single dollar. Next, I signed a power of attorney agreement giving the Foundation's board full oversight of any financial changes. That board consisted of Miriam, my accountant, and a retired judge who had known my mother. Their presence would serve two purposes. 1, legal insulation. 2, visible authority. Then I had the forensic accountant set up a digital trap. He placed decoy documents and dummy accounts within the cloud storage files labeled Final Transfer Details and Authorization Codes. These were monitored with high-level tracking systems that would alert us immediately if opened. Within 72 hours, Daniel accessed all three. The system recorded the IP, timestamp, device ID, and session length. Meanwhile, I had begun to quietly initiate the dissolution of all jointly held assets. I met with our mortgage provider and removed his name from any refinance options, citing legal proceedings. I closed our shared credit lines, paused the joint savings, and requested transaction histories dating back 6 months. That is when the final pieces began falling into place. Over the course of 3 months, Daniel had funneled more than $80,000 from our joint accounts into a separate business entity registered under Celeste's name. These were listed as consulting fees, wellness advances, and reimbursement expenses. But none of it matched any actual service. It was laundering, plain and simple. And now it was traceable. The civil attorney filed an injunction to freeze that business account. She also prepared the preliminary complaint for financial misconduct, asset misappropriation, and attempted fraud. I signed the papers. The next morning I walked into Daniel's home office while he was still away in Costa Rica and retrieved a hard drive labeled Presentations. I plugged it into my laptop. Inside were pitch decks, investor memos, and videos of Daniel and Celeste rehearsing their sales speech. One slide stopped me cold. Projected 12-month return on the Marga Center, powered by Victoria Langston's seed funding and legacy vision. I sent it to the lawyer. That afternoon, Celeste called. Her voice was fake sweet, the kind of tone women use when they already know they've been caught but are hoping you'll be too tired to fight. She said, "Vic, I think you might be confused about a few things. Let's talk this through, just us." I said I was open to that. We could meet when I got back from my own little retreat. In the meantime, I told her to check her inbox. She didn't reply, but I knew she had opened the cease and desist notice. By the end of the week, Daniel returned to Asheville. I was not home. He texted, then called, then sent a voice memo saying how hurt he was that I had involved lawyers. I didn't answer. Instead, my attorney scheduled a formal delivery of the lawsuit documents to him at his yoga studio, along with the dissolution of marriage paperwork and a separate claim for restitution of jointly misused funds. I left one final card to play. I contacted the lender managing Celeste's loan. Since I was still listed as guarantor, I requested an immediate audit of repayment activity. She had not made a single payment in 8 months. This made her property currently held in her name and Daniel's business partnership eligible for lien under the co-guarantor clause. In simple terms, if she could not pay, I could claim the land. They had built their dream retreat on a foundation of stolen plans, stolen money, and unpaid debt. Now it was mine to dismantle. I booked a weekend at a quiet inn near the Blue Ridge Mountains. I took only my phone and my mother's journal. That Saturday morning I woke early, watched the fog move through the hills, and allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Grief does not always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence and spreadsheets and legal filings, but in that moment I let it look like a breath. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm getting it all back, Mum. Not just the money, all of it, myself included. They thought they had me, but they had no idea." Daniel must have realized something was wrong when none of his access points worked. He tried logging into our shared bank portal 3 times in 2 days. Each attempt triggered a silent alert that my forensic accountant logged. He also tried calling the mortgage broker to inquire about the refinancing option he had pitched to me weeks earlier. They told him the file was closed. Then came the email. He wrote that he was concerned about the energy between us, that maybe we had hit a difficult phase in our journey, and that we should consider a reset retreat just the 2 of us. It was laughable, like a thief asking to go on vacation with the person they had just robbed. Celeste reached out again, this time through a mutual acquaintance, saying that she hoped I would not let misunderstandings ruin our lifelong bond. The message ended with a suggestion that we divide the Costa Rica retreat amicably. I forwarded everything to my attorney. 2 days later, Daniel received the official court summons. His face must have gone pale when he saw the charges: attempted fraud, financial misconduct, and misuse of marital assets. The accompanying file included a full breakdown of the money trail, screenshots of fake contracts, and statements from the bank and mortgage office. Celeste was served separately, with a lien claim for the full unpaid loan amount plus interest, and a secondary notice from the Foundation's legal team demanding the cessation of all use of the name Marga and any derivatives. They tried to act surprised. They tried to act hurt. But by then, the retreat's operations had already been frozen by a Costa Rican legal body following the complaint filed through my attorney's international affiliate. Their investor accounts were locked and their promotional website taken offline pending investigation. I received a text from Daniel the next morning. It simply read, "Can we talk?" I left it unanswered. Then another. "I didn't mean to hurt you. This was just business. I thought you'd understand." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. It was never love. It was never partnership. It was leverage dressed as intimacy. A week later, I received a certified letter from his lawyer requesting mediation. My lawyer declined. The case was moving forward. That same day, I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable betrayal, financial misconduct, and fraud. Daniel's attorney tried to argue that he had assumed implied consent based on our previous discussions about joint ventures. But my legal team had recordings, emails, and evidence proving the trust was never meant to be touched. We also had testimony from Miriam about my mother's intentions and the Foundation's original purpose. In one final attempt to salvage something, Daniel and Celeste proposed a settlement. They offered to transfer control of the retreat back to me, along with partial restitution of the misused funds if I dropped all legal claims and public complaints. I refused. My attorney responded with a counteroffer: full restitution, dissolution of their business entity, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a permanent ban from using any intellectual property derived from Margaret House or my original non-profit plans. If they declined, the civil case would proceed and criminal referrals would be submitted to the relevant authorities. 2 days later, Celeste's name was removed from the retreat registry. A letter arrived at my attorney's office, signed by both of them. They would comply, they would disappear. I won. But more than that, I endured. Daniel's assets were seized to fulfill restitution. His yoga studio closed quietly a month later, and Celeste's professional license was suspended due to findings from the financial audit. She left the state. I heard rumors that she had gone west trying to start over under a new name. I didn't care. The damage was done. and I was no longer the kind of woman who followed the trail of wreckage. I stood in the home my mother died in and looked around at what remained, the windows, the garden, the quiet. And I felt peace, not victory, just peace. Because they had built their dream on top of someone else's grief, and now it was ash. I didn't need revenge. I had resolution. They had taken their best shot and lost. Because I was not just some widow with money. I was a daughter, a builder, a keeper of legacy. And legacy does not die when people lie. It rises when you choose to protect it. I poured a glass of water, sat in my mother's old rocking chair, and began drafting the new charter for Margaret House. My work wasn't over, it was just beginning. The civil court moved quickly once the evidence had been laid out. The judge reviewed the compiled documents, transfer logs, altered files, false signatures and banking statements, and issued a ruling that left no room for argument. Daniel was found liable for attempted financial fraud, misappropriation of marital assets, and violation of fiduciary trust. He was ordered to pay back every cent withdrawn from our joint accounts, with interest, and was barred from accessing or controlling any financial accounts related to me or the foundation ever again. His professional certification as a wellness counselor was suspended for 5 years, pending psychological and ethical review. The court determined that his actions not only violated ethical boundaries, but demonstrated a pattern of manipulative behavior toward clients and partners. That ruling alone cost him the only source of income he had left. Celeste fared no better. The unpaid loan I had co-signed was enforced by the bank, and since she had defaulted, the full responsibility transferred to me. But I filed a claim immediately and enforced a lien on the retreat property in Costa Rica. That land, which she and Daniel had bragged about turning into a spiritual haven, now became legally mine. A motion was filed to seize the property for repayment. Within weeks I received confirmation that the land had been auctioned, and after legal fees and debt clearance, the remaining funds were returned to the foundation. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply took a deep breath and let the final layer of resentment fall off my shoulders. The retreat website went offline. The company was dissolved. Their social media pages vanished one by one. Neither of them issued any statement, no apology, no explanation, but that silence was loud. And for the first time in months I heard something louder, my own peace. I sold the house where Daniel and I had lived together. It had too many ghosts, too many rooms filled with manufactured memories. I kept only the dining table my mother had given me and the chair she always sat in. Everything else was donated or discarded. I moved into a quiet cottage on the edge of Asheville, just outside the woods, close enough to the town, but far enough to feel like my own world. The foundation, now fully funded and legally protected, was restructured under the name Margaret House. Its mission was simple: provide financial education, legal guidance, and emotional support for women over 40 who had experienced betrayal, loss, or financial abuse. I did not just want to heal, I wanted to help others heal too. My first seminar had 6 women, divorced, widowed, abandoned, silenced. By the end of our first meeting, one of them cried as she said, "I thought I was too old to start over." I told her, I thought that too, until I did. The foundation partnered with local shelters, career programs, and therapists. Slowly it grew. One story became 10, 10 became 30. They weren't just numbers, they were lives that had been told they were past their prime, that their pain was private, that their silence was noble. We broke that lie together. 6 months after the final ruling, I received a check in the mail. The envelope had no return address. The amount was exactly $24,870, the last remaining balance Daniel had owed after the court ruling. The memo line simply said, "Final payment." There was no signature, no note, just a completed debt. I deposited it into the foundation account the next day. That night, I walked through my small garden, the one I had planted from scratch behind the cottage. It wasn't perfect, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Every seed, every bloom, every corner. I stood beneath the old oak tree at the back of the lot, looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're safe now, Mum, we're safe." Starting over at 50 was not part of my original plan, but sometimes the ground has to break open for something honest to grow. After the case was closed and the money secured, I dedicated myself fully to Margaret House. It began with simple workshops, Sunday afternoons at the local library. Women would arrive with notebooks, fears, and stories they had never said aloud. Some had been left with nothing after divorce. Some had been manipulated into co-signing loans they never understood. Some had stayed in toxic homes because no one had ever shown them how to stand alone. We started small. How to read a bank statement, how to find a lawyer who won't treat you like a child, how to say no and not apologize. But the real shift came when we started telling our stories, out loud, without shame. One woman, Susan, was 61. Her husband had drained her pension and told her she was too old to be independent. She sat in the corner of our first session, arms crossed. By the fourth week, she was helping 2 younger women draft letters to creditors. Another woman, Grace, had left an abusive partner after 32 years. She used her settlement to open a catering business. At our 1-year mark, we had helped nearly 200 women reclaim financial control. Some left relationships, some confronted family, some just stopped feeling small, and I found something better than justice. I found purpose. I had my routine, morning walks, coffee by the window, afternoon calls with the foundation board, evenings sometimes spent reading letters from women who had moved across the country, started new jobs, opened their own accounts for the first time. I kept them all. A folder marked proof, not of what I had survived, but of what I had built. I spoke at 2 conferences, one regional, one national, on the intersection of financial abuse and emotional trauma. I never named Daniel or Celeste, not because I feared them, but because they no longer mattered. I was no longer defined by what they did. I was shaped by what I did next. The money my mother left me had once felt like a final gift. Now it was a beginning. I established a scholarship in her name for women returning to school after age 40. The first recipient was a woman named Ava, a single mother of 2 who had once worked 3 jobs and now wanted to become a social worker. When she received her acceptance letter, she emailed me. She wrote, "I didn't think someone like you would understand someone like me." I wrote back, "I am you," just a few years down the road. In that moment I realized something. Betrayal isolates you, but rebuilding brings people to you, real people, honest ones. I had spent so long thinking survival was enough. It wasn't. Restoration mattered more, not just healing but rebuilding stronger. I had done it with lawyers, with spreadsheets, with strategy, but also with kindness, with remembering who my mother raised me to be, not angry, not defeated, just awake, aware, unshakable. It was a quiet Thursday when I found the old photo again. I was cleaning out a drawer in the study, sorting through things I had not touched since the beginning of all of it. The photo was creased at the edges, faded a little, but still clear. It showed my mother and me standing in front of a garden bed we had planted together the summer I turned 12. She was laughing, holding a tiny shovel, dirt on her face. I remembered the smell of that day tomatoes, rain-soaked earth, sunscreen and hope. I sat down and held the photo in my hand for a long time, not crying, not aching, just remembering. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. A soft breeze passed through the open window, lifting the edges of a stack of papers on my desk. One of them was a letter from a woman named Camille. She had attended one of our first workshops and had just opened her own consulting service for women starting over. Her letter said, "I thought surviving was the goal, but you showed me that thriving is possible. Thank you." I placed it next to the photo and smiled. That evening I took a walk through the neighborhood with a small dog I had adopted from a shelter. Her name was Olive. She had been abandoned twice before, quiet and skittish when I first brought her home. But now she walked beside me, proud and calm, like she knew she belonged, like I did. As we returned to the house, my phone buzzed. A message from Ava, the scholarship recipient. She had passed her midterms with honors and wanted to know if we could meet for coffee. I replied yes without hesitation. Then I stood at the kitchen counter, poured a glass of water, and looked out the window. The last light of day touched the leaves just right, turning them gold, and for a moment I felt my mother with me. Not in memory, not in grief, just in presence, in purpose, in every woman we had helped, in every dollar that had gone towards something that mattered. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you have ever been left holding the pieces of what you thought was forever, know this: you are not broken, you are not too late, you are not too old. You are just at the beginning. Sometimes the best revenge is not winning, it is not proving anything to anyone, it is simply becoming untouchable and free.